Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Minahan and her panel of guests bring you leading-edge astrology conversations through a journey of soul growth patterns connecting astrology's energetic cycles. Get ready to understand your path in the cosmic roots of the stars.
Hello, I'm Sue Minahan, founder of Talk Cosmos, leading edge conversations, awakening the authentic self to empower soul growth. And today is December 4th, the 4th of December, 2022. And it is the panel for Planet Buzz, and we have a wonderful guest joining, Dr. Tad and myself, and that will be Mark Jones from the UK. And today's subject, wherever you are located there, and thank you for checking in and listening with us, is Jupiter thrives. Because Jupiter, that archetype of expansion, challenged by excess, always a flip side of everything, but yet the energies revel in hope, potential, and the message is starting new opportunities for success. So what blocks it? Well, it might be our awareness, but we'll find those things out because now we're ready for Planet Buzz.
Focusing on planetary ecliptic orbital cycles and planetary pairs called synodic cycles connecting the planets at the same degree that begin our relationship, these are the members of Planet Buzz.
I'm Sue Minahan, the founder of Talk Cosmos, an eclectic evolutionary astrologer, consultant, certified color energy life coach, vice president of the Washington State Astrological Association, member of Kepler Astrology Toastmaster Club, of a Dwarf Planet University diploma and AA with music degree. I love mythology, philosophizing, collaboration. I'm an artist, writer, a perpetual student of life.
And I'm Dr. Laura Todd. I work as a spiritually oriented psychological astrologer with students and clients around the world. As a counselor, writer, and educator, I love helping people recognize their inner strength, take advantage of auspicious moments, and navigate times of challenge with greater ease. On my own podcast, Mythic Storytime, I discuss astrology, mythology, and actualizing our full potential. Holding a PhD in human science, my doctoral thesis, titled Guided by Celestial Light in a World of Artificial Illumination, explores the lived experience of contemporary Western astrologers. In addition to my astrological work, I have a course in personal mythology that explores the stories we carry from our ancestors and the impact those narratives have on our lives.
And as the ancient Hermetic code reveals,
as below, so above. As above, so below.
And I am delighted to introduce Mark Jones from the UK here for us. And Mark Jones is an astrologer, psychophysicist, therapist, and hypnotherapist. Mark's based in South Wales, works with clients and students all over the world, a regular speaker and workshop leader in North America, and is the author of 3 wonderful books, Healing the Soul, Pluto, Uranus, and the Lunar Nodes. In the second book, The Soul Speaks, the therapeutic power of astrology. And that explores the transformative power of the natal chart reading. And then the last book, the third one, in 2020, which has been long awaited by many, many astrologers and really of merit, is the planetary they all are, the planetary nodes and collective evolution. And you can always reach Mark at markjonesastrology.com or his name, Mark at markjonesastrology.com. So thank you very much, Mark. We are together, the 3 musketeers, I suppose, to forge our journey through Jupiter. And to begin with, we know that for our audience that Jupiter ingressed last May into Aries for a sprint into 8 degrees and then turned retrograde to go into Pisces. But it returned to that 0 degree Aries point October 28th. And now coming up, it again will be just before the winter solstice, which is so profound, I think, thinking of the light returning shortly after that, and the cardinal energies. We know that the cardinal signs, which involve Aries and Capricorn, which the sun will be in, are world points, all because I'm getting distracted here with the astronomy, which I'm not great at explaining. So the point is, it all connects to all of us. These are opportunities. So with that said, I wonder how we should begin. Maybe people want to speak about Jupiter. What is Jupiter to you?
I mean, if I may, and thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I mean, isn't Jupiter on one level, I'm sure I'm not alone here, why we got into astrology, that we were looking to have this symbolic expression of our faith and vision and our sense of the soul's yearning for meaning, which is symbolized so beautifully by the beauty of the night sky. You know, it's shocking, isn't it? When we grow up in cities, we forget what it's like to be in the deserts of Arizona, or I was in the Sinai desert once in the Garden of Elias, and for a night camping out, just how close the Milky Way is, how many shooting stars you see, this sense of the radiance of the cosmos and it not feeling so far away, it being so bright and formed in the night sky. And I think many of us, certainly myself, we turn to astrology wanting some form of symbolic expression of our soul's journey or our life path, you know. And what's so beautiful about Jupiter is that's what it's all about, isn't it? The vision, the faith, the sense of, you know, that big picture sense of why we're here and how we deal with the frailties of human life, the fragility of the body, existentially being born to die, you know, the great things that every human has to face. Even in a good life, you have to face those things, never mind the tragedy that can befall one. And in that sense, what's it all for? You know, what is the value and preciousness of the human life that I feel so strongly is valuable and precious and meaningful? And, you know, can astrology be something that helps us guide us, you know, be that sort of guiding star? And it's funny we do this, but, you know, Jupiter's been sat like this luminescent O-ring light in the sky above the tree at the back of my house these last few weeks before this conversation. You know, in a sense, astrology is literally the guiding star. And on another sense, it is this sense of subtle orientation, you know, that we become astrologers because we're interested in the symbolism of unfolding our true potential. Who am I really? What am I meant to be doing? What is my life path? And I think that's why I love Jupiter, because it's all about the vision of the life path.
Oh, I love this exactly because it is visible here outside my lanai. It's the one bright night picture. But yes, the vision, I think this idea of the vision, that we can personalize it and then have a path that responds to us, that we learn how to be human, really. It has, from how you were speaking, I just thought of what meaningfulness really means, because it changes as to what one wants to seek for that meaning, but yet it really drives down to a vision that propels, that gives the bait, that gives the anticipation or the expectation of waking up and to the sunrise and saying goodnight with the sunset.
Yeah, well, and I think too, it's interesting to think about, right? It's the first of the social planets. And so Jupiter having this in between where we have this personal relationship with it, right? This drive or our connection with spirituality or with astrology, like you were talking about, Mark. And yet it's also our connection with the larger, with it being the social planet, with a collective simultaneously. And it sort of holds this bridge between those two parts of human existence, of self and community or group or society. And that,
well, you could argue, couldn't you, Laura, that the first social act was all those people seeing that night sky together and going, hey, what do you think this means? and the various henges and the various stone circles aligned to some solstice star point or sun point. And then it is social in a sense, isn't it, to participate under a sky together, under a communal sky, to see the same moon, to see the same Jupiter, whether you're in Hawaii or Atlanta or South Wales, is something that unites us in a subtle way, doesn't it? It provides a sort of subtle, unique collective. And then the thing that I think so fascinates me with Jupiter as a bridge is that you feel this sense of communion with those stars or with that greater life, but also you could argue that greater life is reaching out to you, to literally touch you and to inspire you, or almost gently entreat you to carry on walking your path, come this way. And we weave that, don't we? That's what religious stories or myths become, don't they? They become kind of woven tapestries of those more private illuminations or communal illuminations, where people try to make sense of them as ongoing stories to inspire others.
Yeah.
Yes.
All the myths, right? They're all explaining mundane events using allegory, using metaphor, that then can be carried through time, right? And because it holds true as archetype, whether it's antiquity or today.
Yeah, the centaur itself signifies this union between the humanity of mankind and the natural instinctive beasts, as it's called, of the horse. Of course, the horse itself is a very symbolic creature, throughout.
Well, it would be
cultures.
Horse as power and animal power, human part, bow, but also where the arrow's pointed, the arc of the arrow and where it's pointed, the star it's pointed at. But say a Persephone myth or something like that, and I know it's not a Jupiter myth per se, but say it's explaining, the winter months, which we're in here, taken down to the underworld, and that's why she's not up, and that's why the sun's not shining and the plants aren't growing. But it's also more than just the explanation of the seasons, isn't it? It's an explanation for human suffering and being dragged into the depths, and the restorative power of realizing there might be a meaning to being in the depths and going from the abducted one to the queen of the underworld, as it were. So myths do explain these, as it were, actual events, but they also do so in a way that naturally ensouls the sense of the meaning of them. And I think that's the point. Because I think, if I may be so Jupiterian and bold to say this, the meaning of life is not some answer. It's not some reducible principle. It's not the number 42 from the Hitchhiker's Guide or something. It is, the meaning of life is self-evident when you're deeply living it. When you're deeply loving, when you're deeply absorbed, when you're in some awesome sunset, or when you're seeing that starry Empyrean in the desert, you're not sat there going, oh, what's the meaning of life? What ought I to be doing?
No.
You're just in it. It is. Yeah.
There is that piece of that being present, right? And I wonder if some of that, like with Jupiter ingressing, going back into Aries, and that being at least in our world, but the beginning of the Aries, the beginning of the zodiac, right? So this being, that's sort of as present as you can get, the beginning of the beginning. And really this expansion of of that presence.
It's a great time right now, isn't it, to start some new seed of some new 12-year project. That's what you're making me feel. I'm sort of feeling excited about that myself. I've even got the thing in mind. It's like it's a new 12-year cycle, isn't it? Literally starting on the Aries point, culminating the old 29 degrees, 28, 29 Pisces, and now starting the new vision quest, basically. New 12-year vision quest. Yeah.
Nathan, can we have the slides, please? Okay. It is indeed, because that spark, and here we are with the panelists, and this slide, for those that are YouTube, can check on that later. It happened initially last in May. So coming up in December 20th, not far from now, just before the solstice, we're going to have that, as we all know, for astrology-wise, the third time we're on a path, but this time that entry is going to be full-fledged until May. I think it's in May. I have it down where it leaves Aries. But yes, we are. We can take because Mars right now that is ruling Aries is retrograde, and it's that opportunity to kind of retrace our dreams. How about you guys? We maybe we could speak of some of our dreams. I know, Laura, you often. Oh, and I wanted to mention too, I have all these slides and I'm not going to go through and bother people about the details, but the fact is the energies are out of bounds, and that means they're not limited to the guiding principle of the sun's, the dogma, you might say. They're pure on their own archetypal energy. So communicating Mercury, who's our Hermes, who's the messenger of Jupiter, and Venus, who is what we're attracted to and for desires, and Mars too, our action igniter, are all going to be stepping to their own tune. It's going to be quite interesting.
I mean, that's also a challenge too, isn't it, Sue? Just to be sort of sober for a moment, in the sense that we can say that dogma is clearly narrow or restrictive, but also having a tradition is potentially meaningful. And I think a number of people that are quite open-minded or are searching for something in the modern world also feel a bit lost about what the orientation of a bigger vision might be. It's as if we're transitioning from an era where certain religious structures are changing. Certainly here in the UK, there was an article on the BBC website 2 days ago that a current census shows that for the first time in centuries or in its history, the UK is less than 50% Christian. And you have this sense that like traditional religions are not reaching people in a very direct way in these times when they feel quite discombobulated, quite out of bounds. You know, an out of bounds feeling isn't necessarily an easy feeling, is it? You know, to feel that you don't have those ties to people, those communities. And of course, the word religion itself, religare, means to tie together or bind. When you're out of the bindings, it can be shocking and anxiety inducing just as much as it might be liberating. And sometimes, Sue, my hope and my wish is that astrology itself, for some people, for those people like us, those oddballs like us that are attracted to it, might itself become a visionary, inspiring, symbolic system to help guide people. Because, you know, the soul's journey is profound, whatever the religious tradition or lack of religious tradition you come from. It's just that without a religious tradition, the danger is that the soul's journey will become materialized or overlooked. And to some extent, people won't have that direct sense of being able to access it. And I know just myself, just how liberating it is to find in your life that you've discovered a soulful sense of meaning and a path. It's so profound, isn't it? It's just so beautiful.
Yeah. It absolutely is. And to connect with what works for your own soul, because within ourselves, I know since a child I had interests and ways, but the world isn't always evident as to how to participate with that interest, such as astrology, perhaps. But yet astrology, however a person uses it, has that gift of the symbolism that I'm hearing echoes out to me, because life isn't just linear. It's not a pathway that is an instruction book where you take your first breath and then you learn how to cry and then you learn how to talk or something. It's a whole pathway of inputs that you need to put together, like the poetry or the story of your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is why I see the natal chart as more like a poem than some sort of car instruction manual. It's not an analysis of your transmission or what oil, you know, your car requires for best performance. Some people see the chart like that, but I see it more as the living poem, the sonnet of your soul, you know, yeah.
That's nice. Well, I don't know if we need to go through, we have a bunch of these, and this happens to be the one on the 20th, but in our conversation, we might say for those folks, this is from Greenwich, which is the world where the time begins, and you can appropriate your own timing, and that happens to be at 2:32 in the evening in Greenwich. So it's going to be wherever it is for you. But here it is. Aries is interestingly at a powerful, well, the nodes are interesting. I think, Mark, you've spent a great deal about nodes in depth to understand. Having the North Node in Cancer, 13 degrees Cancer, I'm seeing it's directly opposing Venus in Capricorn still with Chiron. So it seems like it's a healing, a sense of evaluating our wound, our how to make our miseries work for us, how to get past that, make meaningful, right?
I mean, let's hope there's part of that genuine reboot and restart, given the context of the last 3 years or something and the struggles collectively. But also, there is a sobering sense, isn't there? How, aside from one's individual communion, aside from one's love of nature, of other people, it's not a particularly easy time in the world, is it, to develop a clear vision of faith? You know, in a sense, there's a lot going on that has caused anxiety for people and struggle, from the pandemic to various conflicts. I think you can't, for me, for it to be embodied, your vision path, your soul's evolution can't avoid the suffering of the world. It can't avoid the woundedness. Otherwise, it will become a compensatory fantasy. It will become a compensatory idealism. It will be this pretty little, Disney castle in the sky that you build to protect yourself from the horrors of the winter, of warfare, of pandemic, of suffering, of political polarization and culture wars or whatever. So in that sense, Jupiter in Aries speaks also of a certain robustness, doesn't it? Are we prepared to live by? Are we prepared to act as warriors, spiritual warriors, perhaps, of our true vision or belief, without that becoming needless, excessive conflict? Your warning right at the beginning about the grandiose, over-expansive capacity of Jupiter towards excess. Because as I was sharing before we came on air, if you look back through history at Jupiter in Aries, there are a number of sobering things, from the first Boer War to the start of the Second World War, to JFK's assassination, to the dissolution of the monasteries. There's a lot of big, assertive, aggressive acts have occurred in history, and the greatest war that humanity's ever known have started under that kind of auspice. Whereas I think on an individual level, it's much more like, can we learn to assert our own integrity and truth without needless conflict? Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Laura.
But that need to stand by our convictions or act on our convictions, right? The standing might be more when it gets into Taurus, but the action of that, with all the politics that have been going on in this country about civil rights disappearing or being codified, and the need to be standing by, acting on our convictions around those sort of things, and not staying quiet or in that Piscean, like, I'm just going to observe it all, but needing to act on it.
Well, and this is why you get so much excess, don't you, by these historical examples? Because it seems to me a Jupiterian ideal would be, it's one thing to stand in truth, right, and not be afraid of standing in truth. It's another thing to constantly attack other people or make everyone else around you wrong. And they're two very different things. And I would argue the second is more of a projective stance. Jupiter in Aries, for me, in an ideal form, would be about the acceptance of just how much dedication the self will put in to the vision and serve the vision. But that's very challenging, because that's very hard to hold, because you only have to have a momentary flash of something else, or momentarily perceive someone else with a different political or cultural orientation as the enemy, and it's all suddenly a flash, isn't it? And that's the danger with Jupiter in Aries, clearly, and there are a number of collective situations where we could say things are very tenuous. It's not like, certain parts of the world are quite close to the escalation of conflicts onto a world stage. It's a very sobering collective situation, but I think a rather inspiring individual promise, in a sense. It's certainly a great time, isn't it, to move out of an acceptance, even perhaps a stuck acceptance of late Jupiter in Pisces, towards volition again in your own pursuit of your truth.
It reminds me, looking at the North Node of Jupiter, which, because it's in Cancer, the family of man. I remember Margaret Mead has that great book many years ago, The Anthropologist rather. But 13 degrees Cancer is really, if we can realize the commonality and that shared need to supply each other and tolerance. I mean, all of this chart could potentially speak on those terms, to bridge, well, as you say.
That node in Cancer, I mean, Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter, these are planetary nodes, and they're less well known, but all planets apart, everything other than the sun makes a node because it crosses the ecliptic. And Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter, South Node Capricorn, North Node Cancer for many, many centuries. In fact, really, in the time of Christ, that was Neptune's nodes, South Node Capricorn, North Node Cancer. But Neptune shifted in the 11th, 12th century to North Node Leo, South Node Aquarius. And in fact, in the 20th century and the early 21st century, Pluto moved to where the nodes of Neptune were at the time of Christ. In fact, in that great alignment in late 2019, early 2020, that seemed to correspond with the pandemic and the pandemic response. Pluto and Saturn came to their own south nodes, and then Jupiter joined them. So Jupiter returned to its own nodal axis with them. And those nodal axes roughly corresponded to where Neptune's nodal axis was at the time of Christ. So in the planetary notebook, I ruminated the spiritual impulse of mankind in the West, Christianity at the time of Christ, and now we've reached the Pluto point of it, where we're excoriating it, where we're digging through it, where we're almost throwing it away. Or, what was initially the spiritual impulse that guided Western civilization has become something completely different. And we're in a sort of shock about that, a shock that Nietzsche pointed to in the late 19th century with the whole idea of the death of God. We haven't really got over that. We haven't really got over that as a collective. And you could say that certain individuals like Carl Jung were attempting to make their way through that collective fragmentation and find this more secure psychic path to wholeness that he called individuation. And I increasingly feel that he was a towering psychic genius and creative genius that was helping people do that very thing. And I think astrology can very much also serve people to do that, as he himself became aware,
Yes. I was trying to get your books. Nathan, can you show the books there, please? I'm just lost with these too much shenanigans. I can't get.
That was just it.
Oh, you had it. If you could, there it is. Okay, thank you. Yes, Mark.
So that first book looks at the natal chart and how you could use Pluto and Uranus or outer planets to condition the nodal axis of the moon. The outer planets symbolizing, as it were, the transpersonal domain, and the nodes of the moon symbolizing your personal evolution. I paused that then to write about therapy and the soul speaks, therapy and astrology, because of course I was doing so many readings and I was just discovering this was powerful material. And there was a lot that you had to think about how you shared that with people in a way that was inspirational and not detrimental, which I'm not always sure is focused on enough in the astrological world, how we put this across to people in a one-to-one or other setting. And then the planetary nodes, ever since I've written Healing the Soul, there was supposed to be a last chapter on the planetary nodes, but it was just too big. It was just out of control. Mm-hmm. So I was working with a researcher for the planetary node, and we looked at these charts through history. I mean, that's why I knew, that's why we were easily able to look at other Jupiter and Aries periods in history, because we created all these hundreds of charts, starting with the Roman Empire all the way up to the contemporary world, so that we could analyze these planetary nodes, so that we wouldn't just burden astrology with more cumbersome information without checking out it was really solid.
Meaningfulness. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Following the Jupiter principle with it. And actually, one of the big breakthrough moments for me was around Jupiter's nodes and the realization that Alan Turing, whose mental code-breaking skills cracked the Enigma code in the Second World War, had his Mercury at 13 Cancer on that north node of Jupiter. And you can trace every big breakthrough in his life, from personal losses to his eventual imprisonment and suicide, but also the breakthroughs around the code breaking, all have transits conjunct or square or opposite at that point. And it was really remarkable. It was a totally electric, like, solo research on the kitchen table with the laptop moment, and the biography of Alan Turing, flicking through charts. And it was like, oh my God, it was like discovering, my little version of discovering penicillin or something, way less usful to the world, but still something for me.
Just a little more abstract,
exactly.
But still pivotal.
But I still enjoyed it. I felt like I'm the only person so far in history to have seen this and that it works like this. It was a fun moment. And then I sat on that for a good few years, and I worked with the researchers so that we could make sure we created enough evidence to not just it be Mark's hippy dippy intuition telling people to, look at these things. I wanted it to be substantive.
Well, there's great hope. We do have a break coming up, but this is so powerful. And I'm thinking there is hope even for this United States. I say that to get past some of it. Everybody has their shadow side, and we certainly have plenty here in this country, because the sun is at 13 degrees Cancer, and the rising, depending on what chart you use, if it's a sibling chart, is Sagittarius. So that North Node would hopefully break through to see the commonality of our human mankind. And I know, Dr. Ted, you have thoughts too. Shall we take a break and then we'll come right back? I'm with Mark Jones of the UK and Dr. Laura Tad, and we'll be right back. Thank you. While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We are currently in the Yang period of Sagittarius, ruled by the largest of all planets, Jupiter, the Roman god, or Zeus by the ancient Greeks. By leaving a cycle based on power and powerlessness of life and death and regeneration, involving committed relationships, Sagittarius energy finds meaning for an expanded perspective and potential for actualization in their search for truth. As a mutable fire sign depicted by the centaur, Sagittarius is adventurous and seeks the beyond. Sagittarius travels to far places, physically and mentally, to find the truths of life.
This is
Talk Cosmos brings you leading-edge astrological conversations with hour-long programs each week on KKNW. The show goes live every Sunday from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific. Talk Cosmos weekly programs are also available to watch live on Facebook and YouTube, along with daily chats throughout the week on the Talk Cosmos YouTube channel. While you're there, make sure you click like and subscribe buttons so you can get the full Talk Cosmos experience. Or, if you'd rather listen to the show archives with audio only, the entire podcast collection since 2018 is available on most podcast carriers. So, grab your coffee, tea, or kombucha and enjoy the show.
Talk Cosmos is celebrating its 6th season and has a special gift for everyone listening to the show: a free mini transit reading from your natal chart. This reading can help you discover your life path forward and make you aware of current opportunities and challenges. Talk Cosmos Kaleidoscope Visions panel invites you to participate in this learning experience and to interact with the astrologers reading your chart in 2023 during the monthly Kaleidoscope Visions show. Schedule your mini transit reading and find more information about the panel at talkcosmos.com. We look forward to connecting with you for a free natal chart mini transit reading during the monthly Kaleidoscope Visions show at 1 p.m. Pacific on Talk Cosmos.
Want to hear something different from talk radio? Keep your dial on Alternative Talk 1150.
Hi, we're back again. In fact, I was going to pull up, if I can go backwards, one more. There we are, Dr. Tad, Laura. So we're back again, December 4th, and it's Planet Buzz with Dr. Laura Tad, Mark Jones, and myself. And we're talking about Jupiter, the largest planet, could fit us all in there in the solar system, and the king of gods and life. So, but taking a moment here, Laura, do you have something coming up that you want to tell people about?
I do, and it won't be, you don't have it yet. I'll get you the link. So in the end of February 26th through March 4th, I and a dear friend of mine, and she's got a couple other people, will be hosting a retreat for Awakening the Goddess retreat in Nicaragua. And so I can get you that information. It'll be a week-long retreat of some astrology and body work and breath work and massage and all kinds of different modalities of connecting with the self on the beach in Nicaragua, right next to a turtle sanctuary. So you get to see the mama turtles.
What month?
Nice.
End of February 26th through March 4th.
Okay. And of course, people could go to your website. And
it's on my,
and
I'll get you some links for that. So that's the next thing I've got.
Well, Nicaragua. And Mark,
you fly into Costa Rica and then just drive across the border because it's 7 miles from the Costa Rican airport. So it's easier to fly into
I'm
Costa
sure
Rica.
it's all incorporated into a wonderful learning experience. Hi, and Mark, and what would you have that you would like to share?
Well, in 2 weeks' time for NCGR San Diego, I'm giving a talk, Jupiter, how your vision shapes your reality. So, I mean, that seems perfect, doesn't it, really? In the short term, that's the short term. And then just have a look at markjonesastrology.com. There's loads of free stuff, loads of, an advanced blog talking about all these different things, and also courses on counseling skills for astrologers course, a transformational astrology foundation course, and lots of different talks and various things. And I'm also designing with my researcher at the moment a reimagining of the 12 archetypes of astrology as a course, but that won't be released until the summer of next year, until at the earliest. But come and join me in 2 weeks at the NCGR San Diego for more Jupiter, if you can handle it. And I'll have slides and I'll talk through my vision of what I think astrology is offering and what its sense of meaning is in the world. And I will try to show that both big picture in terms of why we study astrology, and I'll also try and show it pragmatically in charts, but obviously in a short format, there's some limitation to that. Because I would say to people, if you're thinking like, how does the chart actually work? That does take a while to get good at. And I found the thing that's helped me the most recently working with my researcher is to just look at a lot of different charts of things that you know quite well, that you've read a biography of, or you know something historically about the individual, or the person because you're working with them as a client. It's the correspondence of life information with the symbolism of the chart is that really builds the picture of experience over time. So give yourself a break if you're concerned about your own chart, and here's my great Jupiterian message to everyone: avoid cosmic paranoia. Astrology can create cosmic paranoia. Sometimes it can make you worried about your chart. It can make you worried about the, in quotes, bad aspects. And I say to you, life's full of ups and downs, isn't it? That's just the deal, whether astrology reflected that or not. We all know that life isn't just great all the time. So charts have challenges in them. Well, and that's all part of their great gift, isn't it? That's part of their great gift, that they could show you what those challenges might mean and therefore help you undertake that challenge in a more meaningful way. So I say, avoid cosmic paranoia and focus instead on the meaningful engagement with the challenge as part of your own healing path and a part of your own path of meaning.
Yeah. So we can't hear you. You're muted somehow. No, absolutely. I mean, I'm all about, with the Sag rising, I'm all about the reframe of like, how can you look at this square and not say, oh, how do I don't, and that paranoia that like a lot of clients, or that piece of like a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, right?
Yes, it is.
Your squares are bad. And then they see, oh, I've got,
well, Saturn's bad. Saturn itself is bad or something. I mean, this just doesn't make any sense. I mean, how could Jupiter function without the ballast of Saturn, the expansive vision, and then the structure to bring the vision into play. Demonizing archetypes will only hurt society. It will only hurt individuals and hurt the collective. It's like being a parent. Demonizing Saturn is like being a parent that never tells your child off. Despite the fact that they're there with a sharp knife, messing around, you never stop them. I mean, that would be insane, wouldn't it? It'd be cruel to them. You have to, boundaries are so meaningful to love, really.
Yeah. And the cliche, I am so glad to hear this whole idea of translating through the cliches of astrology. That's one reason I really based the premise of Talk Cosmos, was because people get caught up with the negativities. And it is the versus them thing to substantiate really the insecurity of your own self, or the misunderstanding of your own self you don't see or understand.
And I think to some extent, from my personal experience, like when you only give attention to the negative potential of a signature or a that is more likely to be what manifests, right? I was just working
because you're creating a filter, aren't you, over your reality that you're then putting energy into by putting up that filter. Yeah.
Like I was just working with a client yesterday who's got transiting Saturn conjunct their moon. And it's like, well, yeah, that can be hard. And sometimes containment around emotion is a good thing.
Yeah,
that's true. You can find the structure, maybe find the theme of it, find the pinpoints. If you really want to think about, the studs and all that and whatnot, if you get right down to the studs, and then you can replumb the whole thing, the story of it. But
it's also, you're failing yourself if you think that growth is only going to happen positively. We have to be realistic about humans, right? Humans have this great talent for turning good things into awful things in many ways. I mean, that's kind of what we do. Humans can be very destructive, and growth often happens when we realize and take responsibility for the damaging things we've done in life. I mean, that's a fundamental Saturn lesson, isn't it? Which we then reflect on Jupiter and try in our integrity and our moral promise to ourselves to overcome where we made mistakes, if you like. Without the capacity to own the mistakes, without the capacity to take self-responsibility for challenge, what's the point of it all? So the idea that you can grow profoundly without accepting challenge or without accepting suffering it seems silly to me. It seems to miss out on something. Some of the most powerful periods of my life have been supposedly challenging transits. Pluto to Moon Venus involved me moving from a city to the country and starting a family. Yeah, that's challenging. Believe me, when you're woken 3 times in the night with a little one and then up really early with them, it's challenging, all right, but it's incredibly meaningful. It's saturated with this love and purpose that's undeniable. Okay, I had to become very disciplined. I had to really change something about myself. But the idea that it's somehow just bad because it's Pluto to Moon or Saturn to Moon is just a kind of naivete to me, and it's doing a disservice to life and yourself. Both Pluto and Saturn bring enormous gifts, maturation in the case of Saturn and psychological depth and richness in the case of Pluto. Without that, human life doesn't make a lot of sense in a way.
Yes.
And I think that it goes both ways, right? Because with Jupiter, sometimes the danger is that it's so optimistic it's not realistic, right? Can be this sort of exaggerated Jupiter. And so like reining that in, right? And I think that could be some of that with the Aries of like so optimistic, right? I use an analogy I worked with a young boy doing a chart and explained to him he could be like Tigger, and it got him into trouble, explaining his Sag moon to him.
And I'm thinking,
and so that we're like Saturn out, that's in its extreme, right? Too constrictive, too constrained. Jupiter's too permissive, right? And so trying to hold that tension as we have this shift happening. That's why historically, right, we were seeing probably like that history of war or violence is people's my way is the only way, Aries in its extreme.
Well, that's the one extreme. And then even on the other, social utopianism, this idea that there is a one vision that everyone should follow starts to become very dangerous, doesn't it? There's a coercive element in Jupiter and Sagittarius too, like religious conversion or political ideological conversion. And then the suffering of the world becomes the excuse for the extreme measures. And we've seen that explored, haven't we, over the last few years, that issue of how much should society respond to certain threats and how many extreme measures should be deployed. And there are countries still maximizing that approach in the world right now. It's clearly a very interesting territory because, vision isn't always good. Even when vision is good, the way people act on it isn't always very sober. If you unhinge Jupiter from the meaning of a Saturn, the danger is ideological possession, the possession by an archetype in Jungian terms, or instead of a grounded sense of relating your vision to some kind of meaningful tradition, the visions of other people. Saturn, the accumulated structures of tradition. Yeah.
And really, I'm reminded that it's the cardinal square. When you were saying first about accountability, that Saturn is so involved. And then Aries, pardon my throat here, is a relationship sign. So Libra is going to be of such integrity to keep us accountable.
Yes.
It's just astounding how when we look at that cross of those cardinal signs, they each bring in a focus through a constructive square, as we say, or reality through opposite awareness.
Well, because how would we build anything meaningful in the world, right, without challenge? I mean, I'm sure, just like, have you done remodel on your house? I mean, how challenging is that? Just to, have to sleep in a different part of the house because you're doing the bedroom up or the ensuite or just whatever. I mean, everything on day to day is challenging. Yeah. So why would bigger things not be challenging? What I worry about is more this sort of fantasy world that sometimes seems to get created, where we think that we shouldn't have to have challenges. This world where, don't suffer. You're American or you're European. Here's some Prozac or here's some benzodiazepine or whatever. This sort of fantasy, which actually robs people of the meaning of their suffering. Suffering can be terribly meaningful. It can lead people closer. Failed relationships see people ruminate on why they failed, or overworking and then missing out on family life leads people to change later in life and change their values. If you just try and soften all of that suffering, you remove the soulful, as it were, lessons from a Jupiter perspective within it.
Kind of like a home.
Well, I always thought about that with from a statistical perspective, at least in this country, they talk about more than, 50% of Americans have been clinically depressed at some point in their life. And it's like, well, if that's the case, then it's actually a normal state of being.
Yes.
Right. If everyone could at some point in their life been diagnosed as clinically depressed, it's actually a part of life, as opposed to, what you're saying, it's like that there's something to learn from that, because everybody experiences it to some degree at some point. Lean into that. And what's the point of where's the growth? Where's the edge of that? There's real power in living into that and coming through the other side.
Reminds me of,
go on, please.
Well, I was going to say of the mythology, back to Persephone, going down to the depths, or Inanna of her stripping. And
well, because Inanna and Persephone, I agree. There was an Eastern European psychiatrist called Casimir Dabrowski who wrote a book called Positive Disintegration, and he argued fundamentally that these anxieties or these depressions accompany major change. They're not a neurotic byproduct. It's not like, go to your therapist and it's like, I'm going through a major change, but here's this lame part of me that needs help. He argued that it was fundamental to major transformation because of our attachment to familiarity and the conditioning worlds in which we live, which form our embedded security. So in a sense, you would always experience anxiety and depression when you go through a deeper life transformation. The tragedy of the modern world is that in attempting to heal or help too rapidly and remove suffering without appreciating the meaning, we might actually be denying people the transformative possibility afforded by it. We might be trying to, as it were, rush them out of the suffering to go back to a life with less meaning than help them through it to a life perhaps with more meaning. And that's, I think, where certain forms of more progressive therapy and hopefully, from my point of view, a therapeutic vision of astrology, and astrology that's founded in a vision of the soul's, potential and growth, and the power of people's love effectively to shape their lives, could really help people. I couldn't agree more. And why are these stories so rich? Why is the Persephone or Inanna story so rich, Sue? Because we all know that feeling of being taken down, Yeah.
I'm thinking going backwards and forwards here, because we have about 5 minutes. And that is the spirit that we started with. I know that we're talking about the gift of Jupiter, and understanding in a new personalized semblance, you could say, of our own connection with our spiritual reality, which relates totally to the fact that we've short shrift Saturn by not thinking of it as spiritual, which is changing, I believe. And also remembering that if we look at the mythology, that Zeus, or which is a Greek Jupiter, his buddy is Mercury or Hermes, which, just like in our planet Buzz, is as above, so below, as below, so above, as without, so within, as within, so without. And it is that dynamics, which you, Mark, brought up about the whole reflection. And I know, Laura, you too, about the energies we perceive that are intangible in some ways, except from our experience. And I think if people could start trusting and learning, which is why we're talking, to show that there are these ideologies.
Well, and maybe that can be part of this potentially, and it's a short, right? It just sort of flies through Aries. But in these 6 months or so that it'll be in Aries, that in that individual archetype of Aries, it's very much about, right, I am, Aries key word is like, so people's own relationship with that for themselves, right? That from my experience, nothing convinces somebody of a spiritual perspective like their own lived experience. You could talk to your blue in the face, give them all the theory in the world, but until they have their own that's what clicks. And so potentially that could be part of these next few months of that individualized relationship with source, with spirit, with a spiritual perspective that isn't necessarily religiosity, but some sort of connection with the greater picture that Jupiter can bring in.
I mean, it's a brilliant point, but it also, it shows the role of the Hierophant in the past, or the priest, doesn't it? In that we have to be realistic here and say that a chunk of people do not have that experience in a clear enough way for them to trust. Yes, we, perhaps all three of us here have had some kind of experience like that. Certainly I've had experiences so shockingly real that they were life-changing, and they took me years to, frankly, reorientate to reality. So, but I'm aware that lots of people don't, or if they did have them, they can't trust them. And that's a game changer, because people in the past used to rely on an intermediary, didn't they? A priest or a conduit, if they bothered at all. And the danger is we have an increasingly materialist world. We have the failure of the priesthood, if you like, to engage those people. So increasingly those people that have not found some profound inner path are increasingly lost to what? A kind of, the modern technological consumerist revolution, Meta and TikTok and shopping malls, and it's not enough, is it? That's not enough. You can't make sense of human suffering. You can't make sense of being alive from just the modern technological world. So I think the best of us as astrologers, we can help some of those people that are lost. We can help them see from the symbolism of the planets when they were born, something beautiful written in the sky, literally, for their soul development.
Good point, because the word confirmation came to mind. The best answer to a priest of that cultural reality that's been with us since the beginning. There's always been somebody that would understand more about the sky or understand more about whatever we're experiencing, but it validates, it confirms. And astrology too has that gift. Often, you get that answer that you knew inside the reality of your nature, but with guided inspiration, which goes back to we each have our inspired ideas of, first to have the courage to go through the dark, because there is a light if we can just understand what might be in the way. I mean, it's a complex world. There's no quick silver bullet in any way, but there are light beams. There are those shooting stars, like you mentioned in the beginning. And I guess if we can be inspired to have some sense of what our vision, if it can cooperate. Well, any last thoughts?
No, I agree. I mean, what is there to do in a way but be as real as you can, as beautiful as you can, and live life as beautifully and as truthfully as you can until you drop? What else is there to do, I say? Yeah.
Thank you, all of you. Dr. Tad,
Thanks.
Mark, Joan. Go ahead, Laura.
Oh, no, just thanks for joining us, Mark. It was good to see you.
Yes. Until again, folks.
Thank you for joining us on Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Minahan and her panel of guests connect soul growth patterns with the energetic cycles of astrology. Be sure to tune in next Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific Time to continue your journey through the roots of the cosmic pathway.